So here we are on the mean streets of West Reading for another video on the history of Reading, and today specifically its link with the abolition of the Atlantic slave trade. Now, there's a bit of a tendency amongst British liberals to pat themselves on the back about the abolition of slavery in the British Empire in 1833 and the abolition of the Atlantic slave trade by the British in 1805. But what this kind of misses out is that an awful lot of abolition and an awful lot of the work done to abolish slavery in the Americas was done first by slaves or enslaved people themselves. And that's really going to be the subject of today's video. Now, the problem with this is most of the work that was done by enslaved peoples in the Americas to get rid of slavery was done obviously in the Americas and not in Reading. So there's not an awful lot of sites in Reading that are linked to the slave resistance that took place in the Americas against slavery, but there are one or two, and so we're going to be looking at one of those buildings today along the Oxford Road, the famous Oxford Road of West Reading. Now, the place that is linked to slave resistance against slavery in the Americas is a building linked to the Royal Berkshire Regiment. Now, the Royal Berkshire Regiment, this is a bit of a tenuous link if I'm honest. The Royal Berkshire Regiment is, or had its foundations in two other British regiments, one called the 49th and one called the 66th. Now, the 49th Regiment of Foot had a involvement in the abolition of slavery in two ways. Basically, in both ways, it was trying to stop the abolition of slavery. It was a regiment that was based in the Americas, and it really fought in what the first big and the first successful slave rebellion in the Americas, the Haiti Revolution. In the late 1700s, a former slave turned freeman, turned partial plantation and slave owner himself, joined in with a huge slave rebellion that was going on in Haiti that coincided with the French Revolution against French slave plantation owners in Haiti. This was partially successful, but during the French Revolution, the British also declared war on France, and as a result, the British wanted to get involved in the French slave plantation colony, Haiti. And so the British tried to invade Haiti, and Toussaint Louverture, who we'll see an image of later on, he was very successful in leading the slave army in its resistance to the French and British armies, and the slave army heavily defeated the 49th British Infantry Regiment, and they were forced to return to Britain with only 49 soldiers left. So this British regiment that later has its roots in Reading with the Royal Berkshire Regiment was heavily defeated by Toussaint Louverture. It was also involved in putting down slave rebellions, including rebellions such as that of the Maroons, and we'll talk a little bit more about Maroons later on. Actually, someone will be telling us a little bit more about Maroons later on in this video. And there you go, on Reading's Black History mural there is a picture of Toussaint Louverture, the incredibly successful Haitian general, border slave himself, ended up freeing Haiti, what is now Haiti, from slavery by defeating both the French and the British Army and the 49th Regiment of Foot, okay, later the Royal Berkshire Regiment. There we have him, Toussaint Louverture. So the 49th Foot Regiment, which would fight against slave uprisings in the Americas, would later merge in the 1880s with the Royal Berkshire Regiment, and the Royal Berkshire Regiment were based at Brock Barracks, which you can see behind me. It's still an Army Reserve Centre, but the Royal Berkshire Regiment, as far as I know, aren't based there anymore. So, yeah, this was the regiment that fought against Toussaint Louverture in the 1790s for many years, and eventually had to return back to Britain defeated in 1796. So the next big link between Reading and the resistance to slavery that took place in the Americas is not any building or place, but actually some of the people of Reading, and one individual in particular who has family links going back to not only the Royal Berkshire Regiment on one side of their family, but also the Maroon slave resistance communities that sprang up in Jamaica, in British controlled Jamaica in the mountains. And that person's going to be telling us all about who the Maroons were and their link back to these Maroon communities. Joined here by the writer, poet, musician and singer Julia Titus, and she's also a YouTuber. She's got her own YouTube channel, Ma Bessie Productions. So yeah, welcome and thanks for joining us, Julia. Great to see you, and great for us to chat about the history that we're talking about today. So could you first off just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, so I'm Julia Titus, born and bred in Reading, Berkshire, and yeah, I'm a singer, songwriter, actress. My degree is in community theatre actually, but I don't tend to do much acting, although just in my stage, on my stage show. So I do more singing, songwriting. Yeah, so that's it really.
Okay, and I understand you've got family from Reading, from both sides of the story that we've been looking at. So the Royal Berkshire Regiment, and also you have family heritage on your Jamaican side, going back to the Maroons.
That's right. So my granddad was in the Berkshire Regiment. His name was Jesse Eden, and that's my mum's dad. So he's my granddad. And he died in 1937. But he was injured at war, wounded in war, and yeah, he was part of the Berkshire Regiment, and stationed at the Brock Barracks. He was stationed at the Brock Barracks, and my mum was born in Bracknell. And on my dad's side, yeah, we've hailed from the Maroons, so in Jamaica, specifically St. Elizabeth, the compound town.
Okay, excellent. You mentioned the Maroons there. Could you tell us a little bit about who the Maroons were, what they were, and what their role was in kind of helping to bring slavery to an end?
Okay, so the Maroons were the enslaved Africans. So they brought Africans from Africa to Jamaica to farm the land and do all the stuff that the Taino and Arawak Indians could no longer do, because they practically wiped them out, the people that had come over to colonize, whether that was the Spanish, the Dutch, the English, the French. They all had a kind of part in the Caribbean. And yeah, so when the England came, the Maroons ran to the hills. The Spanish told them to run, and lots of the Spanish ran with them actually into the hills when England came. And then yeah, so they lived in the hills really, and became part of a group that just really wanted their freedom. So they actually invented guerrilla warfare in the hills of Jamaica.
Okay. So presumably, yeah, the British Army was trying to control Jamaica as an island, and the Jamaican interior as well. So the mountains and the forests. And I understand that was quite hard for the British Army to do because of various things. Yeah. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, they tried a few times. I think they had about three wars, and the English kept trying to defeat the Maroons and the Jamaican people. They just couldn't win, and they had so many casualties. And in the end, they said, "We need to come to an agreement. We'll give you some land. This is your land, but we'll take the rest of it." So they actually gave them 5 settlement places in Jamaica, the Maroon towns, and a compound town being one of them. And yeah, so it was settled by the Jamaicans having been given a piece of their land, so the English could have the rest, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. That does make sense. Excellent. So did your family, the people in your family, your ancestors who were part of the Maroon communities, I understand, I think we chatted briefly about it before, that at some point they moved from the Maroon communities that were up in the mountains of Jamaica down into the lower part, the kind of lower valleys or lowlands of Jamaica, and from there made their way, one of your ancestors or your relatives, I believe, actually made their way to Britain.
That's right. So way back when. They were in a compound town in a settlement, and then they moved down to the lower land. And then my granddad, at some time, they at Retreat Mountain in Westmoreland, they settled. We have lots of Tituses there at Retreat Mountain in Jamaica, and just down from there is Spring Garden, which is where my granddad settled. And then from there, that's where my dad was born, and he then came over to England in the 1950s.
Excellent, thank you very
much.
much.
My mum.
Oh yeah, there we go. And I understand your mum's from Ireland, or her family from Ireland.
Her mum is from Ireland, and when my granddad was stationed in Ireland, that's when he met my grandma, and they came over together. So yeah, they came over together in I'm not sure when, so yeah, before 1932.
Wow. So I understand you still have connections back to, your brother is friends with people that still, because the Maroon community still exists today, I understand.
Oh yeah.
Your brother is still in contact with people in those communities, and yourself, I think, as well.
That's right, yeah. So there's a real vibrant community. The Maroon town, the Akompong town, all the Maroons. It's a really strong, they're still strong and a part of the community, and they are their own governors. They govern their own land. They have their own rules in their own, piece of the land, and the Jamaican government can't kind of touch their land and their policies and so forth. So yeah, my brother is part of a webpage called Akompong Town, where you can find out all about Akompong Town. They're really lovely people, actually. They're great hosts, and they will explain anything to anybody that wants to know anything. They will, give tours, and very accommodating. Yeah, and very proud of their heritage as well.
Yeah, that's understandable. I mean, it must have been a massive struggle, but they did win their freedom, which is amazing. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for chatting to us and speaking to us and meeting with us. It was lovely to speak to you, and hopefully speak to you soon. Thanks very much.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
So before we end this video, I'd just like to say thanks very much to Julia Titus for sharing her history with us and helping us establish a link between Reading and the resistance against slavery in the Americas. I highly recommend that you go and have a look at Julia Titus's YouTube channel, Mar Bessie Productions. Great music, excellent entertainment. I'll put a link to it in the description. Thank you again, Julia. So there you have it, Reading's link to the slave resistance of the Americas against slavery through its people and through its buildings. It's going to be a while before you probably hear from me again, before there's any more videos put out, because me and my wife are about to have a baby, first one, so probably going to be a little bit too busy to be updating you guys with more videos, but I'm sure at some point in the future we'll be able to complete this series on the links between Reading and the Atlantic slave trade. See you later.